The dinner had been going exactly the way I knew it would. My mother steering every conversation like a school bus she'd been driving for 30 years. My sister glowing across the table. My father doing what my father had always done, which was nothing. Quietly, and then Victor stood up. He wasn't a man who made noise when he moved. I had noticed that about him from the moment he'd walked through my parents' front door with his wife and their son. The careful way he set down his wine glass, the way he listened with his whole body, the slow deliberate thing his eyes did every time he was about to say something. He tapped the rim of his water glass once, and the whole table went still. He spoke about family, about what it meant to welcome new people into an old story. He said something kind about my sister that made her press her hand to her chest. And then he started walking, the way people walk in rooms when they want you to feel the weight of a pause, around the outer edge of the table. He stopped at my chair. "I have to ask," he said, "because I've been trying to place you all evening and I think I finally have." He looked at me. "You're with Morrison and Keel." It wasn't a question. My mother's laugh came out bright and papery. "Oh, Darcy does technical work. Very niche, very." He didn't look at her. "Were you the lead structural on the Burrard Pavilion?" Every fork went still. My almost brother-in-law glanced between his father and me. My sister had gone completely motionless, and my mother, for the first time all evening, had nothing ready to say. To understand how I became the daughter my parents introduced as doing technical work, I have to start with the corkboard. My mother kept a corkboard on the kitchen wall in our house in Burnaby. She called it the Proud Wall. When I was 7, she pinned up my sister Paige's Gold Star spelling test and left it there for 3 months. When I brought home a certificate for winning the regional math competition, she said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart," and slid it into the junk drawer under the phone. The next week, she put up a photo of Paige at her first ballet recital. I watched that corkboard for years. I kept thinking, one day one of mine will go up there. At 16, I won a provincial science fair for a structural load analysis I'd built out of plywood, foam, and a formula I'd found in a library textbook. My mother attended the fair, stayed 40 minutes, and left before the awards because Paige had a dance showcase in Coquitlam. She called me from the car. "You looked very focused up there," she said. That was the whole sentence. Then she told me Paige had been selected to perform a solo. I rode the SkyTrain home with my certificate rolled in my backpack and didn't put it on the corkboard myself. I already knew where it would end up. By the time I graduated from UBC with a degree in civil engineering, I had stopped checking the corkboard altogether. I moved to a one-bedroom in Mount Pleasant, built myself a drafting desk out of flat-pack furniture, and started at Morrison and Keel, the way I'd started everything. Quietly, and without anyone watching. Morrison and Keel is one of the better structural engineering firms in the Lower Mainland. I had been there 6 years by the time of that dinner. In that time, I had worked on the seismic retrofitting of 3 elementary schools in Surrey, a pedestrian overpass in New Westminster, and, 8 teams earlier, the structural engineering design for the Burrard Community Arts Pavilion, a public building near the waterfront in Kitsilano that the City of Vancouver had been trying to build for 8 years. The project had hit a foundation problem 12 weeks before the concrete pour. A load distribution issue the original contractor had missed, and the city's own consultants had flagged as possibly unfixable without starting from scratch. My project manager used the phrase significant setback in an email to the client. The phrase significant setback in municipal construction means months of delay and millions of dollars. And 8 years of community effort quietly evaporating. I found a solution. It wasn't glamorous. It was 9 days of calculations, 2 redesigned anchor points, and a document I filed with the city's engineering department at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. My project manager sent a reply that said, "Solid work, D." The city approved the revised plans the following morning. The pavilion opened on schedule in March. My mother attended the opening. She didn't know I'd worked on it. I hadn't told her because I had stopped telling her things that mattered to me. Around the same time I stopped checking the corkboard. She posted a photo of herself on Facebook in front of the pavilion. "Beautiful new addition to our city. Love days like this." My name was on a plaque in the foyer. 3rd on the engineering team list. She had walked right past it. I know what she told people about me because a woman I'd gone to high school with stopped me at the farmer's market on Commercial Drive and said, "Your mom mentioned you're doing a lot of data entry these days. Are you looking for something different?" I had just been invited to present at the BC Structural Engineering Conference. I smiled and said I was doing fine. The problem was never Paige. Paige worked as a social media coordinator for a small wellness company in Yaletown. She liked her job. She was genuinely good with people in a way that was entirely her own. My mother had not put that warmth there, it just was. What my mother did with it was a different matter entirely. To hear my mother describe it, Paige was running a lifestyle brand. She told the neighbors Paige managed a full digital portfolio for high-profile clients. The Christmas letter one year described her as heading up content strategy for a leading Vancouver wellness company. Paige approved Instagram captions and handled DMs. Nothing wrong with that work. The story was the problem. When I pointed out the gap once, my mother looked at me with something like bafflement and said, "People respond to how you frame things, Darcy. Not everyone needs the technical version." I didn't have an Instagram-friendly career. There was no aesthetically pleasing way to photograph a load distribution calculation. So my mother built a story around Paige instead. And somewhere in the years of that building, I had been cropped out of the frame. Not dramatically, just steadily, my elbow at the edge of someone else's photo. She called on a Thursday evening 8 days before the dinner. Paige and Miles were making the engagement official over dinner, with his family on Saturday, and she wanted me there. Then she said, "His father is Victor Ashby." I knew the name. Anyone working in Vancouver's development and planning world knew the name. Victor Ashby had been a prominent developer for decades, sat on city advisory boards, and had a reputation for being exactly what people in his field rarely were: principled, precise, and long-memoried. "That's good," I said. "Darcy." Her voice shifted into the tone she used when she thought I wasn't keeping up. "This is an important family. I need you to be pleasant and let the evening go smoothly. This isn't the time for your—" She paused to select the word. "Your specialist conversations. Just be supportive. Be there for your sister." "I can do that. And please don't make your work the topic. It's very technical and it tends to isolate people. Just say you work in an office. That's plenty." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Okay." On Saturday evening, I reached into my closet and my hand landed on the blazer I'd worn to the BC Structural Engineering Conference 6 months earlier, when I'd presented the foundation solution to 300 engineers and taken questions for 40 minutes. From people who did this work at the highest level in the country. I hadn't planned to wear it. I put it on anyway. Pulling it on, I understood the instinct. It was the one piece of clothing that knew exactly who I was. My mother opened the door before I knocked. Her eyes did a quick inventory of my appearance. "You're early. Good. Miles and his parents are at 6. She moved through the house like a stage manager giving final notes. She pointed to my place card at the far end of the table, nearest the kitchen door. "If there's a lull, offer to refill drinks or check on the bread." She looked at me carefully. "Try not to steer things into complicated territory. His mother sits on the Vancouver Heritage Board. His father is very well connected. They'll be gracious, but they'll notice if things get awkward." "I won't make it awkward," I said. She patted my arm. "I know you don't mean to." Miles arrived with his parents at 6:05. He was warm in a direct, uncomplicated way. His mother Constance had silver hair cut close, and the quiet authority of someone who had spent a long time in rooms where precision mattered. She looked around the house with genuine curiosity and asked my mother something about the neighborhood that my mother answered too quickly. Victor Ashby was exactly what I'd imagined. Composed, unhurried, with a stillness that didn't read as absence. He shook my hand and said hello, and his eyes did that slow, deliberate thing. A careful cataloging, like he was already filing something away and would retrieve it later. My mother introduced me as her oldest. She does technical work, very detail-oriented. Then she turned to lead everyone toward the sitting room, and I followed at the back of the group. Dinner was my mother's production. She had cooked for 2 days. She poured wine and passed the bread basket and narrated Paige's highlights with the practiced ease of a woman who had been rehearsing the same story for years. She described Paige's role at the wellness company, using language she had clearly assembled and refined. Content leadership, brand relationships, audience cultivation. Miles's mother listened with polite attention. His father listened with something more precise. The quiet of a person measuring the gap between what's being said and what's true. Every time the conversation angled toward me, my mother redirected it. Constance asked what part of the city I was in. Before I could answer, my mother said, "Mount Pleasant. The coffee shops are wonderful over there. Aren't they, Darcy?" and handed the bread to Victor. When Miles asked how long I'd been in my field, my mother said, "Years and years. She's very dedicated," and stood to refill the water, bringing me along by asking me to get the pitcher from the kitchen. The 4th time it happened, I sat back down, set the pitcher on the table, and said nothing. Then Victor tapped his glass. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and spoke with the economy of someone who had spent years choosing words carefully. He said something genuine about Paige, about her warmth, about the way she listened, about what it meant to gain a daughter-in-law. He mentioned that he and Constance were glad to be at this table, and then he began to walk, slowly, around the outer edge of the room, the way someone moves when they're thinking out loud, but want the room to feel it. He stopped at my chair. He said he'd been trying to place me all evening. He said he thought he finally had. He asked if I was with Morrison and Keel. My mother laughed and began to answer for me. He didn't look at her. I said yes. I said I was a structural engineer, 6 years at the firm. Were you the lead structural on the Burrard Pavilion? He asked. Because he'd already asked once and my mother had spoken over it. Yes, I said. The foundation redesign, the anchor point solution, that was yours. Yes. He looked at my mother for the first time all evening. His expression was not unkind. It was simply without any softening at all. Your daughter's engineering work on that project is cited in the city's infrastructure planning summary from last spring. There was a real possibility that the Kitsilano waterfront expansion would have been delayed 18 months because of a foundational problem. Everyone had flagged as unfixable. She filed a revised structural assessment that the city approved in under 24 hours. We use it in our firm's onboarding now as a case example of what one engineer can do when everyone else has walked away from a problem. Constance set down her fork. She looked at my mother with a level, quiet expression. You told us she did technical drawings. I didn't want to. You said, Constance continued, her voice still completely even, that Paige was the accomplished one. Those were your words when we spoke on the phone. Paige had gone very still. Now she looked at our mother. What exactly did you tell them? My mother straightened. I was framing things in a way that would keep the evening easy. I didn't want the conversation to go somewhere that makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. Paige said the word back to her slowly. Mom, you told his family I was the one with direction, that Darcy had struggled to find her footing. She looked at Miles and then back at our mother. Her name is on a plaque inside a public building in this city. You posted a photo in front of that building. Darcy's work is difficult to explain. Then you should have asked her to explain it, Paige said, instead of explaining it for her, incorrectly. To people who actually know what structural engineering is. My father, who had been still and careful all evening in the way he had always been still and careful, looked up from his plate. Linda, just her name. Said in a voice that sounded like he had been sitting with something too heavy for too long. That's enough. My mother's eyes went glassy. I was protecting this family. Darcy's work doesn't translate well in social situations. I was making it easier for everyone at this table. Constance looked at her steadily and without heat. What you did was make your daughter smaller so the evening would feel smoother. That is not protection. That is managing your own image at your child's expense. Victor reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, walked to my end of the table, and placed a business card beside my water glass. If you'd like a reference letter for a fellowship or a speaking panel, he said, and looked at me directly, asking my last name. Sinclair, I said, Darcy Sinclair. Mrs. Sinclair, you have my number. Paige looked at Miles for a long moment. Something passed between them that the rest of the table couldn't fully read. Then she looked at our mother. Her voice when she spoke was not angry. It was quieter than anger and harder. I need a few weeks. Before we make anything official, I need to understand what story I've been standing inside of. She slid the ring from her finger and set it on the table beside her plate, gently. Not a gesture, just a pause made visible. I'm not saying no, I'm saying not yet. Not until I understand something. My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I set my napkin on the table, picked up my blazer from the back of my chair and put it on. I looked at my mother and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely calm. I love you, I said. But I'm done letting you tell a smaller version of me to people who matter. If you want me at your table, I need to be there as I actually am. Not the version that's easier to explain. She flinched. My father bowed his head. I walked out without waiting for anyone to call me back. There were 14 messages by the next morning. My mother's started at 8 and escalated in tone through the afternoon. You humiliated us in front of an important family. I hope your career keeps you warm. You have always made everything so much harder than it needs to be. Paige wrote at 11:15 that night. I don't know how to feel about all of it yet. But I am not angry at you. I want you to know that. My father called at 7:20 in the morning. He said 3 sentences. I should have said something sooner. I knew she was doing it. I'm sorry, Darcy. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. There was one message from a number I didn't recognize. Constance. She said Victor had spoken about the Burrard Pavilion project many times over the past year, and that she'd believed my mother's version of me, because it had been said with such complete conviction. She asked if I'd like to have tea sometime. We met 3 weeks later at a cafe on West 4th. She was direct and warm, without needing to perform either quality. She told me my mother had described me on the phone as someone who preferred to stay in the background. She'd taken that at face value. What had struck her at the dinner, she said, was not what my mother had said. but how quickly she'd move to answer for me. As though I couldn't be trusted to speak accurately about my own work. "What do you call it?" she asked. "When someone else narrates your life and gets it wrong on purpose." "I used to call it the corkboard test," I said, "when I was a kid. Waiting to see if anything of mine would get pinned up on the wall." "Did it?" "Once," I said, "eventually." Paige called 6 weeks after the dinner. She said she'd spent that time thinking, and she needed me to know something. "I knew Mom's version of you wasn't the whole picture." I told myself it was just how she talked about things. That it wasn't really doing any harm. A pause. I used that as an excuse not to push back, because pushing back would have made things complicated for me. And I'm sorry for that. That was the hardest thing she could have said. Because it was true, and because saying it meant she'd thought carefully before she opened her mouth. Real apologies have weight. That one did. Miles and Paige did a few sessions of couples counseling, not because anything was broken between them, but because Paige said she wanted to understand the patterns she'd grown up inside before she built something new. The ring went back on 8 weeks after that. She sent me a photo on a Tuesday morning. Just her hand, the ring, a coffee cup in the background, no caption. I wrote back, "I see it, it's good." My mother called on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. I'd been home from work for an hour, eating leftover pasta, reading a report. I almost didn't pick up. She was quiet after I said hello. Then, "I've been telling people a story about you that wasn't the right one. I've been doing it so long I think I convinced myself it was just how I framed things, that it didn't matter much." Another pause. "I didn't understand your work. I still don't, not really. But instead of asking you to help me understand it, I just pretended it didn't count for much. And I told other people the same." It was not the apology I had been imagining since I was 16. Riding the SkyTrain home with a rolled certificate in my backpack. It wasn't formal or public. It was a tired woman on a Wednesday afternoon telling the truth for maybe the first time about something she'd been carrying quietly for a very long time. "If you want to try again," I said, "it has to be with the real version of me, not a simplified one." She said, "I know." I drove back to Burnaby on a Saturday in November. No occasion, just a Saturday. My father opened the door and held on for a moment longer than usual. My mother was in the kitchen and did not come out right away, which meant she was steadying herself, which was as honest as she knew how to be. I walked to the front hall, stopped in front of the corkboard. There was something new on it. A page printed from the City of Vancouver's Spring Infrastructure Summary, the paragraph that cited the Burrard Pavilion Foundation redesign. My name appeared in plain municipal language, the way names appear in planning documents. Without decoration, without elaboration, Sinclair D., Morrison and Keel Engineering. The page was pinned with 2 red tacks. Slightly off-center, like the decision had been made quickly, and she hadn't been quite sure where it should go. My grade 4 school photo, which had always been there at the very edge of the board, half covered by a save-the-date magnet for a cousin's wedding, had been moved inward, closer to the middle. It was not a healed family. I want to be clear about that. Families like ours don't heal on a schedule. They shift, slowly, in the direction of honesty, and then hold still for a while, and then shift again. The space behind that cracked open door was still complicated and would stay that way. But the door was open. At dinner, over roast chicken and the good plates my mother only used for occasions, she set down her fork and looked at me and said, "Walk me through how a project actually works, from the beginning, like I'm starting from nothing." It was a plain question, the kind any parent might ask at any kitchen table. I told her. I started from the basics. How a building carries its own weight, what a foundation actually does, why the ground beneath it matters. She asked questions when she didn't understand. She wrote something down on the back of an envelope. My father nodded and refilled the water. Nobody redirected the conversation. Nobody made my work smaller than it was. It was not everything, but it was something that had not existed before at that table, in that house, in all the years I had sat there trying to take up less space. If you have ever sat at a table where belonging required you to stay edited, where love came with a condition attached, and the condition was smallness, hear this clearly. That is not love. That is management. The difference matters, and you are allowed to name it. The evening that Victor Ashby stopped at my chair and asked who I was, I thought answering honestly might cost me my family for good. What it actually cost me was the role my mother had been writing for me since I was a child. The daughter who keeps the peace, who stays at the far end of the table, who does not make the evening complicated by being fully herself. Roles can change, but only when someone decides to stop reading from the old script. And if you are sitting at a table right now where the entrance fee is pretending to be less than you are, where the price of belonging is staying quiet, and staying cropped and staying all small, ask yourself one question. Who decided that's what it was supposed to cost you? Because the first person who needs to know you are done is not them. It's you.